Hi guys, so whilst this isn't my normal finance content, I did make a video a long time ago about my shared ownership property and the pros and cons and things like that, and I've since sold my property, and I think I get a lot of questions around the process and what that was like and certain things that I thought I would just make a follow-up video just about the sales process and stuff like that. I know that this video probably won't appeal to my usual audience, but I'm just hoping that those few people that have asked for this and maybe some new people from search, it will benefit you in some way. So I'm going to kick off, but if there is anything that I don't cover here, it was a long time ago. I sold my property in September last year. So if there's anything I forgot to mention, or if you have any other questions, just pop them in the comments below, and if I'm able to answer them, then I will. So the first step was essentially to get in touch with my housing association and let them know that I was interested in selling my property. And the reason for that is because essentially, in most instances, it will be within your contract that the housing association gets 8 weeks or so to try and sell your property on themselves. So you need to give them the option to do that. Now, for me, I was lucky enough that my housing association said, no thanks, we're waiving our right to do that. So you can just go ahead and market your property in a normal way. Now, there's pros and cons of both, and mainly the things to consider are timings and cost. So of course, if you sell within 8 weeks, that's great. It's a quick sale, etc. But generally you have to pay the housing association a normal type of estate agent fee. So I think it was about 1% for mine. So that was going to be a lot of money considering the full value of the property. So, and yes, it is the full value of the property rather than the share that you own. I do think this is something a lot of people don't realize, is that when you're selling, and generally when you own the property, even if it's shared ownership, the costs that you pay are as if you own 100%. So it was going to be 1% of the 360k or so that my property was worth. The other thing to note is that if you do sell your percentage, you have to sell at the RICS valuation. And this is essentially the next step that you have to take, is to get a RICS valuation. So whereas with a normal property, when you own it, you can essentially sell it for whatever you like and you don't need a RICS valuation. Usually it will be enough just to get a few estate agents in and they'll give you a ballpark of what similar properties have sold for. With shared ownership, regardless of whether you're selling 100% or 40% or whatever it is, you have to pay for the RICS valuation, which is usually a few £100s. Now, the main reason that you need a valuation is that essentially, because the housing association owns the remainder of the property, they will take their fair share. So whatever the fair market value is, if they own, for example, in my case, I had 40% and they had 60%, they will take the fair market value of 60%. And then anything above or beyond that is for you to cover. So if you sell for less, then you have to cover the loss in full. And if you sell for more, then all of the profit was for you, essentially. So I thankfully sold for more, so all the profit was for me. Now, the other reason that you have to have a RICS valuation is that if you are selling just on shared ownership, so for example, if I owned 40% and I was only selling 40%, you cannot sell for a different price than the RICS valuation. So you can't say, I want to sell 40%, but I'm going to sell it for a bit more so I can make a profit. No, you have to sell for that RICS valuation. That's not to say that the RICS valuation can't be higher. So if it goes up or down, obviously that's still then that loss or increase, but it's just about if it comes back at, for example, exactly the same valuation, but you want to sell for more, you can't do that if it's 40%. Hopefully that makes sense. It feels like a very long-winded way of saying it. Now, once you've done your RICS valuation and you're happy with whether or not you're happy to sell at that price, and you know whether you're going to market at your percentage or full market value, you need to find an estate agent. So for me, I went with Purple Bricks, and the reason I did that is because the difference in price was astronomical. So with Purple Bricks, I paid $1,500 upfront. So obviously the downside is that you have to pay this upfront, whereas with estate agents you pay it once you sell. But It's essentially a lifetime fee. So whether you sell your property or not, eventually you'll probably sell it. So it's covered. And if you decide to take the property off the market and then put it back on, again, it's still covered by that fee. Now, I worked out that if I sold through the housing association and paid 1%, it was going to be about 3,600 versus that 1,500 from Purple Bricks. So I would have saved, or I had saved, 2,100 on that. And if I sold by a normal estate agent, the lowest price that I was quoted was 1.5%. So that would have been about 5,400 for me. So again, that's almost £4,000 higher than the Purple Bricks fee. And the main difference with Purple Bricks is just that generally you do your own viewings. So you are the one that arranges the viewings and things like that. But for me, that was better because I didn't really feel comfortable people coming to view my flat when I wasn't there anyway. So I was going to be there regardless. And I'd been screwed over by estate agents before. So I didn't really want to get into the whole them lying to the buyers or anything like that. I just wanted to be in charge of all of that. So I was really, really happy with that experience. And they took amazing pictures of my flat. So yeah, once you have that, you have to forward their details to your housing association and then you wait. Now, I instructed my solicitor before I found a buyer, and the main reason for that was because I knew what solicitor I was going to go with and I wanted to get ahead of the game. So I knew there was going to be a lot of paperwork, and oh my God, the paperwork. I think selling a normal house or flat is bad enough, but with shared ownership, it's even worse. So just be prepared for tons of paperwork. And because I instructed my solicitors beforehand, I could fill out a lot of the paperwork ahead of time. So when I eventually found a buyer, which I actually found really quickly, a lot of the paperwork was ready. And whilst obviously you then still had to wait for the buyer's paperwork and their solicitors, pretty much most things from my end were sorted. A question that I get asked a lot as well is about how is it that when you own 40%, you can still sell 100% and stuff like that? And essentially the way it works is you buy the remainder of the property on the day that you complete. So it's called a simultaneous staircasing. So on the same day, you buy 100%, so you staircase up, and then the buyer buys it off you. And it's mostly a paper exercise. It's not like you're having to incur a lot of extra costs generally. Although this is something I think that you need to make sure you get a solicitor that knows about shared ownership and is an expert in shared ownership, because I've seen different instances of not paying for extra stamp duty on staircasing simultaneously and then paying it, and the difference was someone who was an expert in it and who wasn't. So I would say that if you are planning on selling a shared ownership property, that you do get a solicitor that is an expert in shared ownership. So other than that, it basically gets treated like a normal sale. So those are the only things I think that are worth mentioning. I also get asked about my selling costs a lot, so I just thought I'd let you know. I paid obviously the 1,500 for Purple Bricks. I paid 250-ish for the surveyor, for the RICS valuation. I paid £375 for a managing agent managing pack, £120 for a deed of covenant, and £1,504 for solicitor fees. Now, I got quite lucky because there were a lot of other fees that were listed that were potential fees that we could have incurred that I know other people with shared ownership properties have incurred. So for example, if a deed of variation was required, it was an extra £750 and stuff like that. So I would say it's worth contacting the housing association and asking for a list of potential costs that you could incur, and just being prepared to cover them all, and being pleasantly surprised when it doesn't all happen, but not being completely thrown off if it does. Now, once that is all done and you've exchanged all the paperwork, the housing association essentially just gives a final statement, like a settlement, with all your outstanding rent and service charges and whatever else, and that all gets paid off as part of the settlement. So the final statement that you get will essentially say, this is what the buyers have paid. These are the extra things they're paying for. So for example, for me, they paid a bit extra for some of my furniture, and then all the reductions. So for example, here was your outstanding service charges to this date, etc., etc. And therefore, and their fees, etc. And therefore this is the final amount that's going to go into your bank account. The final thing I think I wanted to mention was that the RICS valuation has to always be up to date. And for me, I almost had to pay extra for another valuation, which could have changed the price, which would have meant that I would have had to go back to my buyers and say, price has increased, for example, because of the amount of time that it took to go through everything. And it wasn't even that long, I don't think. I'm pretty sure I got the valuation in like March or April, and then it was going to expire at the start of September. So I managed to just get it through like a few days before it was going to expire. There are ways to extend it, I think, if you're late on in the process, but it's just a lot of hassle. So just make sure you're on top of that and you know how long your RICS valuation is valid for. I think that's it. I think that's all I wanted to mention. Like I said, if you have any other questions that I've not covered or thought of, just pop them in the comments below. And yeah, hopefully that was useful. And thank you for watching. Bye.